got some things that I can do to potentially make my life better. Because at the end of the day, that's my research goal. I was talking to someone earlier that, I don't find areas that you can do. We've got a lot of other really smart people who are doing that. And I pray that we find that drug quickly. But my goal is, so what do we do in the meantime? We're waiting for this drug, right? But we've got to still live. So what can we do to continue to have our lives be the best they can be? A little bit about me. I spent nearly 18 years in the pharmaceutical industry before going back to grad school. And worked in a lot of different areas. Never worked in the PD world. In fact, probably until 11 years ago, I knew what PD was, but I really didn't, right? I could have told you what a description of someone who has PD, right? Everybody knows a tremor, right? But that was about all I knew. So my mom was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease 10 years ago. Changed my life. I quit my job. I was a manager for an international company and doing really well. And said, I want to do something to help my mom. And so I thought at the time I was 43 years old. And I said, I'm a little too old to go to medical school and be a neurologist at this point in my life. So what can I do? And just kind of fell into grad school. I said, why don't I just go get a PhD? I was interested in all of the non-motor things, the neuropsychiatric symptoms, depression, apathy, fatigue, the mental health stuff. So I found rehabilitation psychology. And it's a field that helps people who are diagnosed with a chronic illness or disability. How do they adapt? How do they maintain a quality of life? How do they deal with this new issue, right? So that's what I did. Kind of that's what I'm talking about. Identify ways to improve quality of life while we wait. And those are my focus areas. And I've got a lot of them. I've been writing with Indu Subramanian, if any of those of you who read the research might know her. She's from UCLA. We've done some writing on loneliness. We just published something on meaning in life and apathy. We're working right now on stigma in Parkinson's disease, writing a paper as we speak. And the next one will be demoralization in Parkinson's disease. So we're going to begin down this path, publishing some of this stuff so awareness is increased, right? The docs need to know this stuff too, right? I talk a lot to both groups, the MDS people, movement disorder docs, and the patients. But frequently the docs don't know this stuff. They know how to treat your motor symptoms. They can give you Cinemet and your tremor's gonna get better. Your slowness will improve, but you may still be depressed. You may still be lonely. You may still have apathy. You still may be demoralized, and you don't want to go out and do things. That's not really quality of life. You don't have a tremor, but we've got other problems, right? So that gives you an overview of who I am and what we want to talk about. I share that because early on when I arrived in Dallas and started doing my research, I would connect with people and frequently I would get a guarded response from people who have Parkinson's because they thought that I might be going to manipulate them and use them to make me something better. But when I shared about my mom, I was much better received. People understood that I was doing this. I don't need my name and lights. I really don't care about that. I want to find something that makes your life better. So that's the reason I share all that stuff. So let's talk quickly about those of you who have PD and caregivers as well. I'm sure remember the day of diagnosis. You walk in, you might have a decent idea that something's not right. Maybe even that it might be Parkinson's. But something happens the moment that doctor says, I think you have Parkinson's disease. And I speak from my mom's experience. I know that she shut down. She didn't hear anything after that. It was all she heard. So what happens? You think in your mind, so now what? Life's over? Maybe you're employed and that could potentially affect your employment. It could Life as I know it is now over. Not an uncommon response. What about my work? If you're working, is that going to affect it? Maybe. At some point, probably. What about your relationships? How does that affect the social roles in the house? Someone who's the primary breadwinner, maybe that's affected. Someone who's the primary person who takes care of things at home, maybe that's now affected, and you begin to have to switch roles. What's that? Family roles. The parent, frequently it's a little different when I talk to a group of traditional age of onset, right? The normal age of onset for Parkinson's is 62. I also talk to people who have early onset Parkinson's disease, which is less than 50. The challenges are very different, as you can imagine. We've got people who are early onset who still have 2, 3 small kids at home. Different challenges than someone who has children who are out of the house, right? So what does that look like? Social functioning. What about getting out and doing the things that I enjoy doing in my life? Can I still do them? Do I want to still do them? How do I feel about it? I talked about some research on stigma. It's a big deal whether or not people go out. Urinary incontinence is a big deal with Parkinson's disease. Is there a fear of going out into a social event thinking that might happen? Sure. I can imagine it would be. Research indicates that traumatic life events may result in changes towards meaning in life. It's stuff like that that led my research down this path of how do we deal with these issues? It's more than sitting down with someone and just talking them out. We got to find some type of an intervention that works. So what are some of the results, things that happen after that PD diagnosis, when you walk out of that doctor's office and you go home? Reactive depression is very common. That's different than clinical depression. Reactive depression is literally what the word says. I have a reaction to what just happened, and now I'm depressed. Almost happens all the time. Anxiety. Again, all of those questions we just asked, my life's over, what's next, what about my relationships, my family role? That's pretty anxiety provoking. Can I still do the things that I want to do in my life? Right? Uncertainty. I've done some research around the concept intolerance to uncertainty. Right? How difficult is it for you to change course in your life psychologically? It's called psychological flexibility. Do I have the ability to change the way that I look at this situation? Right? Because there's always two ways to look at a situation. I get diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, it's horrible or it's not. Or these are the terrible things about it, but these are all of the really positive things that I still have. Right? As someone who's trained in counseling, I know that if I'm sitting across from a client, those are things I talk about all the time. Which list do you look at? The deficits or the things that you still have? It's attitude, it's choice. Anger. Anybody in here angry that day? Or angry, had times since that you were angry? Not uncommon. Apathy. Hopefully you guys have heard of apathy. It's a big deal in people with Parkinson's, neurologic conditions in general, but certainly people with Parkinson's disease. It's just a lack of motivation. Someone tells you you have apathy and you say, I don't care. It's apathy, right? I don't feel like doing anything. It's not depression, but it is, right? There's a really fine line between apathy and depression. We can differentiate that with some different measures, instruments that we use in research. But sometimes it's hard, but they look similar. Experiential avoidance. You just don't want to go to those social engagements anymore. Maybe it's stigma, maybe it's fear, maybe it's uncertainty, maybe it's depression, maybe it's all of them, right? I just avoid the things that I used to do because I don't have what's called self-efficacy. I don't believe that I can do the things that I used to be able to do. And so rather than risk other people seeing that, I stay home. Then I become lonely, then I'm isolated, and then we have a whole lot of other problems that come with that. But that's a whole other talk on loneliness, for sure. So, add this in. COVID. Right? We were locked up for, I don't know, a year plus, basically. Still issues today. We had not yet seen the fallout of the isolation of COVID. I can promise you. But what I can tell you is depression's up, suicide's up, alcoholism's up, family abuse is up. You're sitting at home, you're locked in your place, you have nothing else to do, and you begin to get frustrated. You begin to feel, what's the use? The other challenge is, you feel stuck, right? I'm just going to put a lot of these up here and we'll talk about them as we go. We get to all these things that we experienced during COVID. Yeah, we began to deal with it, right? You didn't have a choice. If you wanted to be in a Parkinson's group during COVID, it was through Zoom. Awesome that we have that technology, but it's not a substitute for this. It just can't substitute that. So that's something that's important to think about. And one of the challenges that we had, I gave a talk in DC a few months ago, and it was specifically about this issue. It's time to re-engage. It's time to get back into the community, being active, to get rid of the loneliness, because that is an antidote for depression, for apathy, for anxiety, for loneliness, right? Re-engaging. Sometimes it's still scary, right? I just saw on the news today another strain of COVID. I'm like, not surprising. We're going to continue to have that every year until none of us are here anymore. It's just like the flu. We get a different strain of the flu every year. People get sick, people die. It's just kind of the way infectious disease goes, right? We still have to live. So demoralization. I told you I was going to get to this. All of the stuff I've talked about can lead us to this state called demoralization. You guys probably can guess what it means, right? But I'm going to tell you what it means from a clinical perspective. More. Why bother? Demoralization. Meaninglessness. Call it existential despair. What's left in this life? You know, I don't have any, maybe for some people, for many people in our society, work is where people derive meaning. When work no longer exists for whatever reason, people lose meaning frequently. Especially when it disappears because of something that's a chronic illness. It's one thing if you retire, but we still see death rates change precipitously after retirement. Someone's healthy all their life, they hit 70 years old and they retire, and it's not uncommon to see them gradually go down because they've lost that meaning. They've lost their purpose, and now they begin to flounder. Subjective incompetence. There's a negative connotation to incompetent. In this sense, it means I don't have the skills that I need to effectively cope with this situation. Definition, incompetence. I'm not competent to do it. Doesn't mean it can't be learned, doesn't mean it can't be taught, but the way we are right now, we don't have it. Diminished self-esteem and self-efficacy. Self-efficacy, I talked about a minute ago, just basically means whether or not you feel like you can do something. It's why a lot of people don't go to exercise class. They lack self-efficacy. I can't do that. I can't go to Rocksteady Boxing. I can't box. That means you have no self-efficacy when it comes to boxing. You don't believe you can do it. Huge deal in whether or not you think you can do something or you can't. Right? The guy that started Ford Motor Company, right? He said years ago, whether you think you can or whether you think you can't, you're right. I don't always agree with that. But I think it's a funny statement, and I think that a lot of the time that's true. So I talked about coping. There are different ways that people cope. And I don't say there's good and bad coping, I say there's adaptive and maladaptive, which is a semantic distinction, but it's important. Because let me get them up here and then we'll talk a little bit about both of them. Typically, coping is divided into two different types: problem-focused and emotion-focused. Problem-focused coping is, I get more info about Parkinson's disease. I get information about the things that I need to do to keep my life going on the trajectory that it's going, or to make it better than what it currently is today. I need information to do that. That's groups like this, right? That's teaching you how to live with Parkinson's disease. Problem solving. That's problem-focused coping. I have this issue that I can, let me think of a good example. During COVID, I can't go to support groups anymore. That stinks. Problem-focused coping is, let me find some online support groups to go to. It's a good way. It's a good problem-focused method of coping. Those are typically adaptive coping strategies. Emotion-focused, escape from distress. An example of that is drinking, right? Not uncommon that you have a big change in your life, you're unhappy, you've got this chronic disease, and you begin drinking, and at least for a while, you escape your problem. But is that adaptive? I think it depends. It gets to a point where it becomes maladaptive. You know, I think that it's one thing for someone to, I don't want to get into an alcohol talk because that's a whole different issue, but it's something to come home in the evening and you've had a stressful day and you have a glass of wine. It's another thing to come home every night and drink a bottle of wine, right? Now we're going to introduce different issues besides your Parkinson's. Seeking social support, that is an adaptive form of emotional coping. Having other people around me, people who might understand what I'm going through. People who love me, people who respect me, people who accept me, right? It's important. So, when these are insufficient, your coping skills no longer work, and you've run out of options, you begin to have psychological distress, frustration, anxiety, depression, and you begin to feel helpless. I've tried everything. Nothing's working. So it's over. Forget it. That's demoralization, right? So it's important, I think, I mentioned that there's a lot of these constructs, apathy, demoralization, depression, they look really similar. If you came in to see me and I was counseling you, I might not be able to differentiate between depression, anxiety, or depression, apathy, and demoralization from our conversation. I just may not be able to. But there are some ways that you can do it. One of them, the way to look at demoralization, and I talked about this, is subjective incompetence, just meaning I feel like I don't have the skills that I need to deal with this problem. Versus depression is anhedonia, which means you can't experience pleasure in anything you do. That's really the differentiating factor. Somebody who has severe depression doesn't experience pleasure in life. And that's really the defining feature. If you look at major depressive disorder, and I diagnose from a DSM-5 perspective, which is the way that clinicians figure out whether or not somebody has it, anhedonia is one of those things that you look for. That's the thing that differentiates depression from everything else. So why are we talking about demoralization, right? Some of this I've already talked to, it's just a repeat. Changes in social roles can affect you. How am I going to deal with that? How can I cope with now having to be the one who makes money for my family or takes care of things around the house for my family? Or now that I no longer work, how am I going to deal with that, right? It's important to think about those things. Because that's where we get satisfaction and competence. We have these roles in life, we fulfill them, and we feel good about that. Then we get this chronic disease thrown at us. We can't do that anymore. Now what? Right? Demoralization, and then I argue that meaning in life, lower meaning in life follows that. And there's very little work on this construct, demoralization, in Parkinson's disease. I think it's real. I work with a geriatric psychiatrist from Johns Hopkins, and he and I have had this discussion many times. He's like, Brad, I see this every day. It's not depression. I can give them the Beck depression inventory, and it comes back, and they're not depressed. But he said, I see this every day, and nobody's talking about it. And I said, so let's start talking about it. Let's do some research. Let's write some papers. Let's make sure that the doctors who see you all know about this. Let's make sure they're asking, because that's a problem that we've run into, right? I'll just ask this as a hypothetical question, a rhetorical question. Are your doctors, when you go and see them, asking you about your mental health when they're treating your Parkinson's disease? The data says no. 50% of the time, they're not. That's a lot. You do all this stuff, right? The hand stuff, and they watch you walk, and they go, okay, your UPDRS score has changed. It's worse than it was a month ago. I'm going to increase your Cinemet from 3 times a day to 4 times a day, or I'm going to add something else to it, and it'll take care of that. Anything else you need? Yeah. And the hard thing is, and that's a great point, the hard thing is, I can tell you that my mom doesn't know what to say in some of those visits unless the doctor asks. She doesn't have any idea. She calls me, she goes, I'm going to the doctor, and I give her a list because she's up near DC. And I say, Mom, these are the things that you need to ask about. I know what she struggles with, and I say, you need to say, Doc, what are we going to do about this? Because they don't always ask. Many of them are fantastic, and I don't say that it's a blanket statement. We submitted a paper just recently, and it talked about that very issue, and it rubbed some people the wrong way. We got some response from some movement disorder guys that said, you can't say that about movement disorder doctors. And I say, why? When it's true, talk to patients. I do, and I know what they tell me, and I know what the literature says. But it's an important component. So we're going to begin talking about it. The other thing that you've heard me mention multiple times is apathy. I'm going to roll through this one pretty quickly because apathy is really just, it's very common in PD, loss of goal-directed behavior and motivation. You just don't feel like doing anything. Now, I do believe that there are activity-specific types of apathy. Apathy to exercise. Everywhere else I do pretty good, but I just have no motivation to exercise. So it's common to have it there too. It's challenging to diagnose. I've talked about that. A lot of the symptoms are the same. I just don't feel like getting up and doing stuff. 13 to 70% of people with Parkinson's disease have apathy. It's probably about in the 50 to 60% average range. That's a pretty broad range, but that's what we've got to go with. There's no treatment for apathy. Doctors will try everything. Sometimes dopamine works, right? Dopamine is a feel-good chemical. So sometimes when they give dopamine, they give Cinemet. It helps with apathy. Sometimes they'll try SSRIs for depression. Sometimes those work, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they'll try cholinesterase inhibitors. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. I talked to Alberto Espe, who's up at Cincinnati, a very well-known neurologist, and he said, Brad, I don't have any idea what to do with apathy. He said, if you can find something to do with apathy, your career's made. Because none of us have a clue what to do with it. But it's a big deal, right? If you don't go exercise, it's problematic. We know the literature's really clear on the benefits of exercise for people with Parkinson's disease, right? What kind of exercise? Whichever kind you'll do. That's it. That's the answer. It doesn't matter. Just move. We know this. And if you don't do that, then are you going to be Are you going to go to your appointments when you need to go? Are you going to do the other things? Is your diet going to be right? Are you going to take your meds without protein like you're supposed to do? Right? All of these things that come into play. Do I do them or not? So they all affect outcomes. It's among the most common factors negatively affecting quality of life. Apathy is. So it's a big deal. So what do we do about all this stuff? Right? Because that's the operative thing. I don't believe in identifying a problem without identifying a solution. I can publish research all day on telling what problems are, what challenges people with Parkinson's disease experience. But if there's no solution to it, why do you want to hear that? I don't want to hear it, right? Tell me what to do. So it gets me into meaning in life. Maybe some of you have heard of Viktor Frankl. He was an Austrian psychiatrist. He was in concentration camps in Nazi Germany and he was in 4 different camps over 3 years and watched his whole family die while he was in there. Watched countless other prisoners die while they were in camp. And while he's in there, he's thinking, what's the difference between someone who dies and someone who doesn't? And he looked around and he's thinking, is it something physical? No. It's this, they have something to live for. They have this hope. For him, it was what he had when he got out. He had plans for his life. And that's what kept him going. And so that's where all the meaning in life stuff began, was with him. Man's Search for Meaning is a tremendous book. I highly recommend it. At least the first half is his life story. The second half is a counseling theory that he developed called logotherapy, which is just designed to help people find meaning in life. But it's a great book. It's short. It's cheap now. It's been out for years. When we're no longer able to change a situation, we're challenged to change ourselves. We can't change PD. Once you got it, you got it. So my option is to either be angry about it and stay in that place, or say, you know what, this is what I've been given. Let me see what I can do. Those who have a why to live for can bear almost any how. What is that thing that's driving you? Could be family. It could be kids. It could be grandkids. It could be your spiritual beliefs, right? There are a lot of things. But if you have that why, your life's better. Literature's clear, and I'll share that with you in a second. In some ways, suffering ceases to become suffering the moment one finds meaning. There's this concept now that's going around in the meaning world, flourishing through suffering. You get this, whatever this thing is, and here it's PD. You get this, it results in some suffering. Some physical, yeah, but probably a lot of emotional suffering that goes along with it. And as we deal with that, part of it's about our attitude as we go through. And as we begin to change our attitude about that, we get better. Parkinson's didn't disappear, but we get better. Striving to find meaning in one's life is the primary motivational force in man. It's a pretty powerful statement. Everybody seeks meaning. Everybody seeks, and I'll talk about what meaning in life is in a second. Part of it's being significant. Does my life matter? We all want our lives to matter, what we're doing here, right? That when we die, will anybody miss me? Will anybody care? Did I do anything that made a difference? Could be you made a difference in your kids' lives. That's significance, right? So, what do we know about meaning in life? It's one of the most researched areas in the quality of life world. So I went to Google Scholar. Google Scholar, for those of you who don't know, is a way to find research. And it's just Google, I think it's googlescholar.com or googlescholar.org. But I plugged that in, and I just plugged in these words. Quality of life, big, right? You would think there's a ton of research on quality of life. Not just Parkinson's, just all research. 5.9 million articles came up for quality of life. 4.5 million for meaning in life. And only 4.1 for depression. But look at Parkinson's. Think there'd be a lot, not even a million. much more significant meaning in life. Almost as much as quality of life. Crazy, right? And most of this is in the last decade. Prior to 10 years ago, there was some meaning in life research. There have been some guys and gals. Michael Steger is a guy from Colorado State University who's kind of led the way in the last decade. Crystal Park from the University of Connecticut. Paul Wong from Toronto. Right? We've got this group who have just blown up the meaning in life research. So let's do this real quickly. Meaning in life or meaning of life? Meaning of life is a whole different issue. That's asking the question, why am I here? I can't really research that. I don't know how to measure that. Right? It's kind of this ethereal thing that we go, I'm here to make a difference in the world and God brought me here, whatever your belief is. Right? That's hard to research. But meaning in life, I can research. What's your meaning in life? I can research that, and I can write about that. Where do we find this meaning in life? Spirituality, relationship, work. And I'm going to give you a list here in a little bit that talks about areas where you can find meaning in life if you're struggling with it. Traumatic life events may result in changes to one's meaning. Again, that's kind of what led me to saying, maybe I need to look at meaning in life and Parkinson's disease. That's where I started. Clear sense of meaning and purpose can add something positive regardless of your circumstances and your health condition. Whether you have cancer, whether you have Parkinson's disease, whether you've lost a loved one, whether you have a spinal cord injury and you're in a wheelchair. Meaning in life matters, and you can always have meaning in life. You can never get to a place where you can go, no, I can't find meaning in life anymore. Because you can. So what is it? I talked about significance. Experience that your life matters, that you're important, that there's value. I have inherent value, my life is worth it. Right? That's one component of meaning in life. Comprehension, coherence. I understand myself within the concept of my life. My life makes sense. I understand my place in the world. That's part 2. And do you have purpose? These highly valued goals. Something out there that you're working toward. Something out there that you're striving for. That's what I want to accomplish. Purpose, right? People oftentimes talk about meaning and purpose, meaning in life and purpose, in the same breath, or use them interchangeably. Depends who you listen to. There's a little debate on which one is, we'll call it the higher order construct. The way I look at it is meaning in life is here and purpose is one of the things underneath it. There are some people in the literature who say purpose is the thing and meaning is underneath purpose. I don't know. It doesn't make a whole lot of difference right now. But just understand that meaning in life is made up of those 3 things. And just so you guys know, I know some of you are writing stuff down. I'm happy to share these with Leisha, and you can get copies of these slides if you want them. So, I've been telling you, meaning in life is a big deal, right? It makes things better. What does it make better? If you have higher meaning in life, you have more positive emotions. You have more positive personality traits. Hope, optimism, resilience, more of those things. You have greater life satisfaction. And more self-esteem. Feel better about who you are as a person. You have more positive coping, adaptive coping skills.
It's all good.
Yeah, well, talked about that. Optimism. Resilience. Better health-related quality of life. Higher meaning, better quality of life. People with higher meaning report better well-being. Just in a survey, you're asked. And you can differentiate people in the survey. You ask the questions about meaning in life, and there's a scale. There's a way to measure it. And then you ask all these other health-related questions. And statistically, you look at those who scored high in meaning versus those who scored low in meaning. How did they answer the rest of these questions? Dramatic difference across the board. More successful aging. It's also associated with less physical and cognitive decline. Big deal as we age, right? It's the thing I talk to my mom about. She'll call me and she'll say, you know, Brad, my memory is just not as good. I know this because I talk to her every day. Right? She doesn't have to tell me that. But the problem is, and some of you may realize this, that she's 77, which automatically by itself means that her memory is going down. Now you add Parkinson's to it, and it's doubling. It just goes quicker. And that's another thing that we don't know what to do with. Right? I just say, Mom, you gotta be active. You gotta stay active. You gotta exercise. You gotta keep your mind active. You gotta do, we send her word search stuff all the time. Just do a word search, whatever. Less PTSD. I mean, post-traumatic stress disorder, right? I would argue all day long that people who have been diagnosed with a chronic illness that's incurable have PTSD in their life. I've had some psychiatrists argue that with me. And I'm like, really? I mean, it's a life-changing thing. So I believe there is some of that. Less hypertension. Less negative affect. Negative affect is just feeling down. Grumpy, depressed, low mood. Less depression. Higher meaning in life, lower anxiety. Less suicidal ideation. Thoughts of dying. Thoughts of killing yourself. If you have meaning, you're not going to do that. Less substance abuse. Less need for therapy. So, all that sounds pretty good by itself. I would argue that probably each one of you would take everything on that list. More of these good things and less of these bad things to find meaning in life. But there's also lower mortality. People who have higher meaning in life die less frequently. There was a study done in 2009 by a lady named Patricia Boyle. And she looked at adults who were, I think they were 60 and older. And they measured meaning in life. And those who had the highest 10% meaning versus those who had the lowest 10% meaning were compared. 5-year mortality. 50% difference in those who lived and died based on whether or not they had meaning in life. Everything else was controlled for statistically, right? Because if you're like me, I hear that and I go, yeah, but some of those people had hypertension. Some of them probably had cancer. Some of them may have had kidney disease, right? Whatever. They controlled for all of that, which you can do with stats. And it came out and it showed that there's this difference, 52%. Significant. The question becomes, what about people in PD? Their research hasn't been done until just recently. We looked at the role of meaning in life, on apathy, specifically in people with PD. Higher meaning in life, lower apathy. Controlling for everything else. Controlling for depression. Controlling for anxiety. Controlling for age. Controlling for employment. All of those things we control for because we said we want to just see the relationship between meaning in life and apathy. It was the first study. It's been published. It's been out now for, I think it just hit the journal. I just got an email yesterday or the day before. But it's in print now. So now we know. Meaning in life goes up, apathy goes down in Parkinson's disease. Which leads us to what's next. What I always tell my students is, what's the so what? It's great that I could show that, right? Cool. Add that to the other list of things that we saw that were really positive. But we got to be able to fix it. That's what's next. How do we develop meaning? A ton of ways. There is an infinite number of ways to develop meaning in life. I'm going to give you some. Work on relationships. Relationships always falls in the top 3 things. When you ask somebody, find someone who has meaning in life, and you ask them what gives them that meaning, relationships is always in the top 3. Important. Religion, spirituality, also in the top 3 of every single list. Many people with meaning and purpose have a relationship with whomever they call their higher power. You guys get to define that for yourselves. But there's a direct correlation. Work. Those are the top 3 in every single survey that's ever done on meaning in life. So, I would argue that the other thing, before I say that, work doesn't have to be paid employment. My mom volunteers 1 day a week at a homeless shelter. And she loves it. She gets so much from doing that. Just by helping these people. They have a clothing store in there that people come and donate clothes, and then people who are homeless can come get them. And she helps them get what they need. But the meaning that gives her in her life helping these people. So just because you're not gainfully employed, competitively being paid, doesn't mean you can't work. Something to think about. You can all develop relationships, right? You can all develop more. If you don't have those relationships that are meaningful in your life right now, develop some. We've got a whole group of people here who have a lot in common. Maybe there's someone that you can connect with. And then, of course, religion and spirituality. That's a personal thing. That's a personal thing. But I know it's effective. There's no question about it. Your health, exercise, doing things for your fitness, for your body. People can find purpose in that. It's another area. What about nature? You like birds. Maybe you want to go out and you want to do bird watching, and that's what you love to do. It's okay. It's fine. Do more of it. If you love it and it's fun and it gives you pleasure. Education. Learn something new. Maybe it's going to an art class. Learning how to draw, paint, make a sculpture, whatever. Because you know what? That fulfills a few things. Because now you're going to get relationships. Because you're going to be in a group with other people doing the same thing. You have a connection. Community, same thing. This is community. You establish community if you have a spiritual component in your life. I bet you have community with that group. All right. If you have work, if you volunteer, there's community. So now you're getting 2 of them. Right? Organizations, activities, right? Stuff like this. Anything that you enjoy, anything that you get out in the community and do. Hobbies. You know, I just got a call from a guy with Parkinson's, lives in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And he is trying to put together a group for people with PD that's focused on creativity. It's a big deal in the literature right now. This improv, there's a guy named Robert Cochran who's out in San Francisco. I think he may have just defended and finished his PhD, but he's done some work on improvisation and how that positively affects mood in people with PD. Dance therapy's big. It's big. People get bored with exercise. Maybe dance is more fun. I don't know. But find something. Something happens that makes people more creative with Parkinson's. And there are doctors who are looking at it right now and how does the dopamine work in the brain? And what happens with the dopaminergic treatment? That's what they think it is. Is giving the Cinemet, giving the levodopa, is what automatically changes one's creative bent. And you find people who had no creative bone in their body and now they're diagnosed with Parkinson's, and 2 years later they're drawing and they never knew they knew how to draw. Right? Another area. So, back to Viktor Frankl. Right? Everything I talk about is based on Viktor Frankl because he is the man when it comes to meaning. We discover meaning in 3 ways. Creating a work or doing a deed. Creativity. Maybe it's education. Doing a deed. Maybe that's volunteering. Maybe that's being involved in a community group. Whatever that may be. But there's something that's part of it. Experiencing something or encountering someone. We get it through each other. You know, it's really difficult to live in a silo and have meaning in your life when you're a hermit by yourself. You're not sharing. And then by the attitude. Frankl was huge on attitude. You can take everything away from a man, Viktor Frankl said, except his or her attitude to choose the way they feel about any given situation. So one thing you can't take away from anybody, because it's a choice, right? This sucks, or I'll make it through. It matters which way I fall on that continuum. So, action steps. This is the so what, right? What do we do? So that list I gave you, right here, right? So these questions pertain to this list. Find on that list maybe where you derive meaning. How are things going in that area with you? If you derive meaning from relationships, are your relationships improving? Are they good? Do you even have any to speak of? Right? Evaluate how you're doing in those areas. And do more of what you think is meaningful. If relationships is where you derive meaning, man, go for relationships. Establish more. You'll find the other people who also want that. Now all of a sudden you've got community and you share. Something happens when we help other people find meaning in their life. We end up finding meaning in ours. It's just the way it works, right? It's like when you do something kind for someone, you give someone you love a gift. How good does that feel? I love giving gifts to people because it makes me feel really good. When I can do something for someone else that's really kind and they appreciate it, you feel good about that, right? Engage in these activities, right? The creative things, exercise, nature, education. Get in a group. Do it with other people. Something happens in community that you can't replicate when you're alone. Promise you. No question about it. Share your experiences. Again, this goes back to the community piece. Talk about it. You got into a group and you're loving it, share about it. Share with the people in that group what it is that you're getting from being there, how much you love being there. Share with the person who leads the group. They need it too, right? When the talk I gave in DC just recently, it was to people who led groups. And it was, what do we need to do to make our groups more effective? And my talk was different. It was more of a motivational talk. This is kind of motivation, right? I'm encouraging you to do something. But to them, it was different, right? It was teaching them, how do you engage the people who are with you? And how do you draw them in? And what I can tell you that those people feel like they don't get enough of is, we really appreciate what you're doing. Thank you for leading this group. It doesn't happen enough. And they need it too, right? So think about those things. Share your good experiences. Help others foster meaning in their life. When you've got that person who's struggling, you don't have to go into them and try to give them a talk on what meaning in life is. Just talk to them about what they're engaged in. What do you do that you love? It's a great question. If you had 2 hours in your day to do anything, I could ask my mom that, she'd probably say, I'm going to lay down for a little while. Right? But what is it that you love to do? I love to do this, but I don't do it much anymore. Why not? Let's figure it out. Can we? Is there a way to do it? Practice self-reflection. How are you doing? When you start feeling down, depressed, demoralized, apathetic, let me think about that list of things. How am I doing in those areas? You know what? I haven't been out of the house in 2 weeks. Right? Oh, maybe that's an issue. I used to be really involved in this group, and I just have stopped going. Right? Used to go to church every Sunday. It's an important part of my life. Since COVID, I haven't been back. Go back. That's the solution, right? If you don't like the way things are going, do something different. That's the easiest way to say this. Lastly, read inspirational books. Start with Viktor Frankl. What an inspiration that guy is. And there are plenty. There are plenty of books you can read about people's stories who have overcome adversity in their life. We were talking about Helen Keller. What a great story. Deaf, blind. Yet she had a great life. Doesn't make sense, right? You think, how? And then I look at my life and the things that I complain about and go, I got nothing to complain about. Yeah, my things are still real. They still affect me. But man, it's perspective. That's all I've got. So I hope that at least leave here with some thoughts about, I would encourage you to say, do I struggle with demoralization? Do I struggle with apathy? Do I struggle with depression? Do I struggle with anxiety? These are the things that you do for those. Your docs can treat you for some of that. There are meds for anxiety, right? Buspirone are a common med for anxiety. There are meds for depression, tons of them. But there are also non-pharmacologic ways that improve it. Exercise by itself improves every one of them. We know this, right? So, food for thought. I'm open for questions about just about anything. We'll see if I know anything about it or not, but I'll be happy to answer if I can, if there are any. Yes, sir.
Several weeks ago, I went to a physical therapy class out at Ropes and Ranch.
Yep.
And what they were using was the movements of a boxer.
Uh-huh.
And I was just observant that day. But I couldn't see where using those movements coming in to help PD.
So that's it's a good question. The data on rock steady boxing and Parkinson's is outstanding. Very effective. Why? Right? Because when you do something like boxing, you're using two different parts of your mind. You're not only using the physical, but you're moving. So you're having to think as you're doing it. It's great for your brain, but it's also just great physically. You're doing a workout and don't even realize it. You're just standing there moving your hands. Move to the right. Yeah. Squat down. Right? Whatever it is you're doing. But it's fun. The people who go love it. Do they not?
Absolutely.
I mean, and it's not for everyone. My mom did it, and she's like, Brad, that's not me. And I'm like, great, go do something else. But it is really effective. If it's something that you think you would enjoy, I encourage it. Because what I said earlier, I always say it jokingly, what's the best exercise? The one you'll do. It really doesn't matter. Something that gets your heart rate up, right, is what you need to do. Blood needs to flow. Your brain needs that to be effective. When the oxygen stops flowing, brain's function goes down. But good question. Give it a try. Yes, ma'am.
I did the LSVT big program. I think my doctor took about a month to decide I really didn't have Parkinson's, not essential tremor.
Yeah.
As near as I recall, I think it was that appointment instantly. He referred me to physical therapy for LSVT big.
Uh-huh.
And it was a big help. It's a very intensive month, but then you have a set of exercises that you can keep doing.
Yeah.
And they help. They really do help.
Yeah. Have you done the loud also?
I haven't yet done the loud.
Okay. Those of you,
That's coming.
those of you may know LSVT, big and loud, right? One teaches you to project your voice, because as we know, one of the common issues as Parkinson's progresses is your voice gets soft. And usually the person with Parkinson's doesn't realize it, it's the spouse who realizes it, right? You go to the doctors together, and you're talking to the movement disorder doc, and they ask the spouse, you have any trouble hearing him? Yeah. The person with Parkinson's goes, what? Nothing's changed. It does. It goes down. So LSVT loud is a way to teach you to project. LSVT big is about big movements, right? Because when you see Parkinson's, you start to do the shuffle, right? It's teaching you to take bigger steps. Walk back like someone who didn't have Parkinson's and help you feel better, right?
And also help you, at that time, already when I had my hands out about to here, I felt like I was going as far as I could.
Yeah.
And those exercises, they teach you to go all the way out. So you just know that it's there. Not that you're going to do it every second.
Right.
But you know that it's there, and you know how this feels. And I was very, very, very early in Parkinson's,
Yeah.
very early, and already I up there felt normal. And I didn't ever reach all the way out.
And you know, it's those of you who have done loud, it's the same experience,
Yeah.
right? After you do loud, you feel like you're screaming. You're having a conversation, you're going, that just doesn't sound right. But the person you're talking to goes, that sounds like normal conversation. But because it's been so soft for so long, it's all of a sudden this new thing. But they're effective. That's
Yeah,
great.
they're very big. Oh, I was just gonna say, when you were talking about loud, how the voice disappears, that's what my husband's doing, but it's really hard when I'm deaf when I
Yeah. Right. Is it my hearing or his voice? Which one is it, right? Probably both.
Right.
Yes, ma'am.
Brian, what is the availability of psychologists locally that specialize in people?
Limited. It's an area that there needs to be more of. Really, the area that's critically important is geriatric psychiatry. And nationally, we're hurting in that area. People just aren't going in. Those who went into geriatric psychiatry are now retiring. And young docs that are coming through medical school just aren't choosing it. And it's really difficult because that question leads to potentially why the movement disorder docs aren't talking about mental health, because sometimes they don't know where to send you if you've got a problem. I talk to Shilpa Chitnis down at UTSW all the time. She's like, I've got psychiatry, but geriatric psychiatry is a subspecialty that understands this. And then someone who understands Parkinson's disease and psychiatry. The guy that I work with at Johns Hopkins, Greg Pontone, you can find talks of him all over. He talks for a bunch of different groups, but he has a lot of good information about Parkinson's and mental health and struggles and what to do. He's a really nice man. Pontone is his name, Greg. But yeah, it is tough, and it's unfortunate that there aren't enough. You probably see the same thing, Alicia. You probably get calls about who do I go see?
Yesterday, yes.
And the other big issue is it's not just PD. Trying to get in to see a counselor today, it's weeks. Used to be I could call several counselors and probably in the next week get an appointment. Not anymore. Sometimes it's months to get in to see a psychologist or a counselor. And so that lack of availability, and then throw in the fact that most of them have no idea what Parkinson's disease is, right? It's different treating someone with Parkinson's disease who has some of these issues, right? Because some of it is physiologic. It comes with the loss of dopamine. You're going to have some of these symptoms. Versus someone who just is seeing a counselor because I just don't feel good. I would treat those very differently if I was counseling someone, right? But it's a great question, and I hope that over time, the Parkinson's community can begin to make that known. We're still in the infancy of people really understanding Parkinson's disease. Yeah.
Are more and more people being diagnosed? It seems like everywhere we go.
All the time.
More of it.
Yeah. The literature says that by the year 2030, we're going to double again. And we're going to have 20 million people worldwide who have it.
And no cause. That's what my husband wants to know. Why?
Well,
Where did it come from?
The number one cause of Parkinson's disease is age. Right? That's the number one factor that contributes to PD. And then you've got some genetic stuff that we know about. Then you've got some environmental stuff. Right? We know that there's a correlation between Parkinson's disease and well water. There are chemicals. And the well water thing makes sense, right? Because there are chemicals that people use in the fields. If you're using well water, you probably live in the country, those chemicals seep into the ground, they get into the well water, you drink them, and now you've got them in your body. And that's why the commercials that you see on TV about these different chemicals, that there are class action lawsuits against the companies that make them, because we're beginning to see that, yeah, there's definitely a relationship. And that's the struggle, is figuring out, can we find something in people, whether it's a genetic test, whether it's something, eye movement, they're looking at that. Can we identify something that we can begin treatment on before it progresses to Parkinson's? That's the win. If you can ever, because we're never going to reverse it. We're never going to find a drug that you find that, oh, you've had Parkinson's 10 years and I give you this drug and now you're, no, it doesn't work that way. We can slow the progression once you've been diagnosed, or ideally we get to a place where we can stop the conversion, stop that loss of dopamine, right? Because by the time you're diagnosed, you've lost 70% of the dopamine in your brain anyways. How do we stop that before it gets to that point? That's where we're at. And that's the struggle. Because there are still so many unanswered questions. So
There are a lot of people working on that.
and it's changed. You know, alpha-synuclein is the protein that they thought caused Parkinson's disease for years. Now they're going, is alpha-synuclein, does it come from Parkinson's disease? So you have Parkinson's and then you get the misfolding of alpha-synuclein? So it's not really a cause, it's an outcome. Or did the alpha-synuclein really come first and that caused your Parkinson's? We don't know, right? So those things are changing, and the good thing is that many of the researchers that do that type of research are humble enough to say we were wrong. Because that's what it takes. We've been going down this path, and it's just not working. We're throwing billions of dollars at a drug that we're not even sure that it's targeting the right thing. And so yeah, now we've got people who are changing course and saying, let's start over at the beginning and change the way we think about this. Yeah. Well, thank you guys for coming. I always enjoy getting to be around y'all and chat and answer questions and share this stuff that's so near and dear to my heart. So I hope you found something that you can take with you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Brad's got great information, and I wish I had a pen while he was talking because I had a few things I wanted to follow up with. So 3 things. He talked a lot about communicating with your doctor. And with Parkinson's, we know there are so many different symptoms, and sometimes it's hard to remember the 7 things to bring to your doctor. So what we have here is we've got a communicating with your doctor form. Please feel free to come over here and get any of these resources. It's just helpful in kind of keeping somewhat of a diary. You can make it as fancy or simple as you want, but it's a really nice tool for you and sometimes your partner, so that you can make those notes, and then when you have your next appointment, you can go in and talk about, oh, here's what's going on, and I noticed this seems to happen after I eat or after my medication, or this happens at night. But non-motor symptoms are really, really important to be able to convey to your doctor as well. The other things, we talk about meaning of life and purpose. We have got so many different services that we offer for free, whether that is via Zoom or in person. We do a Dance for PD class that is on Tuesdays and Thursdays, extremely popular. Our teacher was actually one of the founders of the Dance for PD. So this is a wonderful class. It is all via Zoom. So anyone can participate. And just like Brad said, you can try it out. And if you say, oh, this isn't for me, that's okay. Part of this comes down to finding that creativity and just exploring some new ideas and maybe a new purpose or meaning in life. We also offer a non-contact boxing class that is through Tribe Wellness. And so what we do is we help fund those classes. That is also a hybrid class, so that's something that you could participate in as well. And then all of our speech classes that we offer, support groups that we offer for people with PD and even for people that are our care partners. So we really try to cover the gamut in terms of comprehensive services that are all available, like I said, whether that's in person or whether that is virtually. And then lastly, a lot of the opportunities that we talked about and a lot of the really encouraging research, we share all these things on our social media posts. It's kind of nice sometimes to read about a new clinical study that came out. I know a lot of people we talked to said, you know, I don't think they're going to find a cure maybe in my day and age, but gosh, I'd love to be a part of a research study. Those are all things that we are constantly sharing because we get all that information. So follow us on any of those because it's a nice way to feel like, all right, this is a way that I can at least feel like I'm a part of something that might take place later on for the next generation. So those are my 3 things that I want to share with you. If you did not get one of our Keep Moving bags, please come and get one of these. It's got some great information. We would urge you and encourage you to take that with you. And I hope that you guys will come back next month for our next program, first Friday of the month, 12 o'clock, right here. So thank you all so very much for being here. Yes.